So welcome to TimeXtender Tuesdays. My name's Jay Leon. I'm the Global Partner Marketing Lead at TimeXtender. In the next 30 minutes, we're going to have a short demonstration. Then we're going to take your questions, and then we're going to play Stump the Chumps. We have had a lot of fun doing this for the last few sessions, and we have high expectations for this being a high-energy, super fun 30-minute time. So thanks for joining us. With us today presenting is TimeXtender's Solution Specialist Director, Joseph Treadwell. Also with us as a Solution Specialist is Taylor Hagin. So thanks, guys, for running the show. So with that, I will turn it over to Joseph Treadwell. Take it away, Joseph.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jay. Did want to mention, first and foremost, welcome everybody. And if you're not aware, we do have the TimeXtender Tuesdays YouTube playlist. You can go to YouTube, just search TimeXtender Tuesdays, or you can find that from the list of playlists on our YouTube channel. So if you just go to youtube.com/TimeXtender, you can find our YouTube channel there, and then you can look at the bottom for our playlists, and then you'll find this playlist here. We'll also be posting the link in the chat as well. Now, for those of you that might be new here today, for the last couple sessions, we've been going over building and creating the TimeXtender reference architecture with Azure SQL Database. Now, this is our most common reference architecture that we see built in the cloud. And so we wanted to walk through building that for you guys in a few sessions. So we've gone over number one, building and using an Azure virtual machine for the TX application server. Number two, using Azure SQL Database for the project repository. And today we're going to go over number three, creating an Azure data lake and using that for the ODX storage. Now, before we get started, we do need a few prerequisites, which I've covered most of these in the previous couple of sessions. You can see those videos again in that playlist. But what you'll need here is first and foremost access to the Azure portal. You'll need permission to create Azure resources. And on top of that, you'll also need permission to create an app registration in Azure Active Directory. Now, this is a separate permission from being able to create resources. Even though you may have a resource group available to you, creating an app registration in Active Directory does require an additional permission for you. The next prerequisite is you will need a TimeXtender app server configured. You'll also need the ODX server configured and running in that app server. Okay, so today you can follow along by reviewing this guide here in the knowledge base. You'll see that link posted in the chat in just a couple seconds here. And that KB article is to use Azure Data Lake Storage with TimeXtender. Now we need to go over a few steps today. Step number one is creating the app registration. So why don't we go ahead and just dive right into that. First of all, you need to get into the Azure portal. And you can go to that by going to portal.azure.com. And then in the search menu, just search for Active Directory. You should see an option here for Azure Active Directory and navigate to your Azure Active Directory. Now, we are going to need to note down some information, which we will need to plug into TimeXtender in just a little bit here. The first piece of information we need is the tenant ID for the tenant that your Azure tenant is in. All right, so copy that tenant ID and paste that over to the side. The next thing we'll need to do is on the left-hand bar here in Azure Active Directory, go to App Registrations and click on New Registration. I'm going to call this app registration TX Tuesdays. Okay. The next option is to who can access or who can use this application or access this API. Do you want anyone to access it, or is it specifically only for your own tenant? If you do have a multi-tenant setup, you might want to consider using one of these other options here. However, I'm going to use this accounts in this organization directory only and click register. So that's going to create the app registration for me. And what I'll need from here is the application ID. So we have here an app registration called TX Tuesdays, and we'll need that application ID to plug that into TimeXtender later. So I'm going to paste that over to the side. And then on the left-hand side, you want to navigate under that app registration, navigate to certificates and secrets. And then in this menu, click on new client secret. This is going to create a secret, a key, or a password essentially for this app registration. We can give this a description. Again, this is just a friendly name here. So I'll call this TX Tuesdays. And then I'll increase the expiration date to 24 months and click add. Okay, so I have that secret now available to me, and I can copy this secret to the clipboard. And I want to paste that again over to the side. This is very important because after this screen goes away, you won't be able to view this value of the secret any longer. And that's for security purposes. So you need to copy this and save this over into a safe place. All right. So now we have created that app registration. We've also created the secret for the app registration. Step number 3 is we want to create the data lake. We're going to provision an Azure storage resource in the Azure portal. Going back to the Azure portal here, I want to navigate to my resource group that I've been using for TX Tuesdays. I call it TX Tuesdays 1 here. And then I can click on Add in the top menu for TX Tuesdays resource group. At the bottom of this menu, you can either search for Azure Storage, or I have here a storage account, and I can just click and add the storage account there. Okay, as you can see, it's already placed that storage account within my subscription and my resource group. Next, I want to give this storage account a name. I'm going to call this TX Tuesdays storage. Okay. You want to make sure that the location is in the same location of your other resources. Now I've been using West US 2 for all of my different resources here. So I want to plug that into the same location. And this is just going to reduce latency when communicating with the data lake from your virtual machine or your SQL databases. Okay, next is the account kind. We want to use version 2. And finally, we have the redundancy or the replication. Locally redundant storage is going to be the cheapest option. You can choose more robust redundancy if you need to with these additional options here. Next is networking. I'm going to use a public endpoint and Microsoft network routing. Data protection, I don't need to turn on any options here. And then advanced, this is a very important option. When creating a data lake, you need to make sure that this option is checked. Data lake storage Gen 2, hierarchical namespace. That's what makes the Azure storage account a data lake Gen 2 storage account. All right, so you want to click enabled there and click next. I'm not going to add any tags. I'm simply going to review and then click create. So that will create my storage account. Once the storage account is provisioned, what I'll need to do is I will need to go to the storage account and ensure that that app registration I just created has access to and permissions to use and manipulate that storage account. And then what we'll do is we'll use that app registration in TimeXtender. So that's how it will authenticate to Azure and be able to make changes within the data lake. Now that the resource is provisioned, I can go into the storage account. I have my TX Tuesdays storage here, and I want to click on Access Control. So here is where I add role permissions or role assignments, and I just want to click Add here at the top and add role assignment. Select a role. You have a lot of different options here. Now you have the option to use Azure Blob Azure Blob Data Contributor. This will work for a majority of the functionality that we use the storage account for. However, it will not work for implementing security permissions. So if you did want to lock certain tables or files within the data lake and secure those using TimeXtender, you will need to select the owner role. So I'm going to select owner. Next is to change the type. What am I allowing access to? And you do want to select user group or service principal. This is a service principal that I'm using here, this app registration. And I call the app registration TX Tuesdays. So type that in, it'll appear in the list. Click on TX Tuesdays and then click Save. So what I've done is I've given TX Tuesdays owner permissions or owner access to the Azure Data Lake. Okay, now I've enabled the app registration access to the data lake. The final step here is to add data lake as an ODX storage in TimeXtender. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my virtual machine. Here we have the Azure virtual machine we created in the previous sessions. And I simply right click on data lake or ODX and then click manage ODX. Now you can see I have my ODX running. I do have here, you can see there's no storage that has been added. So it's right click to add a data storage. And then you want to select add Azure Data Lake Gen 2 data storage. First things first is to provide this data storage with a name. Now this is just a friendly name, so you can refer to it with other people using the project. I'm going to call this ADLS Gen 2. The next is for the Azure Active Directory information that we just created, right? So we have the tenant ID, the application ID, and the application key or the secret that we created just a few moments ago. So I'm going to copy this information from where I saved it over to the side. First things first, we do have our tenant ID. I'm going to paste that in. And then next we have our app ID from that app registration. I will paste that in as well. And then finally, we do have our secret, which I copied and pasted over here. And I'm going to paste that in next. Okay, so we have our Azure Active Directory. We can authenticate to Azure and let it know we do have permissions to make changes to this storage account. The next thing we need is the account name. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that. We go again here to our storage account, TX Tuesdays storage. I will copy that, go back into the ODX and paste that account name in here. So this is the name of the Azure storage account. Okay, next thing is to create a container. We can do that directly from within TimeXtender. We want to do it from within TimeXtender. That way TimeXtender can add certain metadata that it needs to ensure it's talking with the right container. All right, so I'm going to call this TX Tuesdays container and click create. Now TimeXtender will use the Azure REST API. It will define the tenant ID. It will also define the app registration and key to authenticate with Azure. It will then define the account name, the storage account name, and it'll use that REST API to create a container within that storage account. Click OK. We can navigate back to our Azure storage and we can click on containers. By scrolling down, we can see here we did create a TX Tuesdays container here from TimeXtender. Now, back in the virtual machine, I just want to cover these options as well. The next option we have here is timeouts. Now, you do want to be aware of the timeouts. If you do have some extremely long running loads, some very large data sources that may take up to a day or so to load that entire data source for the initial full load, you do want to be aware of these timeouts. You want to be able to increase these timeouts as needed. Now, the default options here are fairly robust, so I'd recommend keeping the defaults unless needed, unless you are encountering some timeouts, you can go ahead and increase these. Now, the next option is transfer to data warehouse. Now, what you can do here is if you're not using Azure Data Factory to transfer between the Azure storage and the TimeXtender data warehouse, so the SQL database that we're going to be using, when you're transferring from the ODX storage, the data lake, to the Azure SQL database data warehouse, you can actually leverage the virtual machine to move that data. Now, of course, a virtual machine is a limited resource. It's going to have a limited amount of memory. And so what you can do is you can limit the memory usage here to ensure that you're not hitting the memory capacity of that virtual machine. Now, it is recommended to use Azure Data Factory for this data transport, and that's what we're going to be setting up in our next session. Okay, so I've created the data lake and used that in TimeXtender for my ODX storage.
Holy smokes, it seems like it's been an hour's worth of work all done in 15 minutes. Joseph, absolutely stunning. Thank you very much. So Taylor, how are we doing on questions?
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, we do have a question here. When I upgrade the ODX server to a newer version, is it still possible to import all these settings? Settings like tenant application ID and the application key.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. Yeah, so in TimeXtender, all of this information is encrypted and stored in the cloud-based repository. So the nice thing about the ODX is it does have a cloud-based repository that TimeXtender manages for you. You don't have to manage that. All of these details are encrypted and stored in an encrypted fashion in that repository. So that means that when you upgrade to a new version of the ODX server, all of this information will come with it. It's really nice, especially if you're adding many different data sources and they all have connection strings. Once you've plugged in all that information, you don't want to have to come back and put all that in again. So when you upgrade to a newer version, all of this information will come with you.
Great. And that was it for questions. So thank you very much. All right.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay. All right. Excellent question. And thank you, Joseph. So now we move on to our Stump the Chump session. Taylor, I think we've got a willing victim.
Yep. We've got Ted Clark on the line. Ted, feel free to unmute yourself when you're ready. Ted has a great question. I think this is going to be a doozy today. So.
Yeah, awesome. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hi, Ted.
Awesome. Hey there. This is great to see, by the way, all the API portal configurations. The question I had is kind of taking all these portal configurations and kind of doing the next step. So we have a setup where we bring in all this data, we gather these insights, and find great information. But then we want to go take the next step of kind of going and taking action on that data. So the question kind of is, how do you enable this automated take the next step, either via API updates or updates right back to your data warehouse when you say, hey, this is a no-brainer, or hey, this requires some human intervention to go make a decision. How can that land kind of with the platform and with some of the technology you've even been showing within Azure Portal today?
Awesome. Okay. Well, great question, Ted. I appreciate you jumping on today. Just out of curiosity, where are you located, Ted? We have people joining in from all over the world, so I always like to know, just curious where our audience is at.
I'm in Seattle, so doing a lot of work around Microsoft SQL Server. So, yeah.
Okay. Very cool. Awesome. All right, so great to have people from Seattle, and we had some people calling in from India and all over Europe. So yeah, so exciting to see that. Yeah, great question. So I believe the question is, how do we involve more automation in TimeXtender and allow users, when they're looking at reports, to be able to write information back to the data warehouse? So that's a common a common requirement or ask I see from business users. And I always like to encourage best practice around this scenario. So it's very important that a data warehouse is a reflection of the business's data, right? If there are discrepancies or information, severe differences between the business's data, meaning the underlying ERP system or other systems available, and there's major discrepancies in the data warehouse, that can cause some serious confusion. So first things first, you always want to make sure that the data in the data warehouse is a reflection of the business data. So I would recommend initially that we make sure that the business users have a process to go in and update the backend system. This can be an ERP system, CRM system, maybe it's some kind of log sheets or files that they can go through and update. So, most of these people will likely have access. They can go into the ERP or tell a colleague to go into the ERP and make the necessary change. However, there are other instances where you may have business rules that do, different conversion. Let's say a value comes in for a state and you want the full name in that value, the full name of the state. So we can use your state as an example there, Ted. Washington, if somebody types in WA, you want that to show up as Washington, right? That's a business rule that the business has. How do we ensure that the business users can go in and add those rules effectively throughout? So we've seen various different implementations of this. One great way to do it is to build an Excel spreadsheet that the business users have access to. They can have access to it either directly, or maybe they have some sort of Power App that can write to this Excel spreadsheet. And then you can use that Excel spreadsheet as a data source. You can bring that in and then look up the values into your dimension table. So I can show my screen here again and show TimeXtender and kind of walk through a little bit how you might do that. So we do have here, we have a little data warehouse and we have some different variables and options here. So what I would do is in the ODX, I would manage that ODX and I would add that Excel spreadsheet as a data source right here. And then by mapping that Excel spreadsheet, that table into the MDW, I can use it as lookups. So let's say, for example, we have here a sales orders table and a sales transactions table. If I want to add a lookup from one to the other, I simply create a relationship, and that's going to be order ID to order ID. So you'll likely have a relationship in your mapping table, right? Which would be, WA, the code, to what you want the translation to be, or the code in your value in your table. So that would be your relationship. Whatever field has the WA or the incorrect value. And then what you can do is you create a lookup of the value you do want to have. So you'd have the corrected value in your Excel spreadsheet. And then you can simply drag and drop that over. So I'm going to take this field from the sales orders table and drop that down. So I would drag and drop that and click OK. And that's going to create a lookup of the corrected value. And so as users have additional instances, let's say somebody adds a space at the end of WA. And so not only do you have WA, you have WA space. You want both of those to convert over to Washington. So as users add these additional values, the lookup will continue to work and pull in these additional values. So you could allow the business users access to an Excel spreadsheet or a Power App so they can push that data directly and then make these updates in TimeXtender. Does that answer your question, Ted?
Yeah, that's great. It's an option that, enabling those business users to be able to do their things is, you wouldn't send them to Azure portal, but you can certainly send them to Excel. So yeah, that works.
Awesome. Great. Thanks. I know I just gave a very high level of that today. If you do want to dive in a little bit deeper, we could definitely make this a session, an additional session in TimeXtender Tuesdays, and I can walk through that entire process. It is a very common thing to have what we call, a mapping table where we're mapping these different values. So that's definitely something that we can do. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any suggestions for additional Stump the Chump questions or additional topics for a mini lesson, please let us know. We are going to put this this feedback submission form here in the chat, and you can jump right in there and send us some feedback. We always like to know what the audience is hearing and hear some feedback from our users. So if you have any ideas where there would make this session more useful for you, please don't hesitate to let us know. Thanks so much, Ted.
Excellent question, Ted. Excellent answer, Joseph. And oh my gosh, you've got a streak going 3 times in a row, not stumped. We gotta work on these questions, people. We gotta come up with something a little bit harder. And you know, it might seem like you knew about the question in advance, but you know, we won't give away our secrets. Anyway, thank you everyone for attending episode 3 of TimeXtender Tuesdays. Episode 4 will be 2 weeks from today. If you've registered on our website, we'll be sending you a link to this recording tomorrow. And we'll also be sending you out an invitation to the session 2 weeks from today. Those invitations go out 24 hours in advance, so you can look for that in your inbox on Monday morning, 2 weeks from yesterday. If you have not registered, you won't get the link to the recording and you won't get the invitation to the next one. So you can go ahead and register if you haven't already by going to the link we just posted in the chat, and you can find that link on our website. Also, if you want to come back later, we just go to timextender.com/resources/events, and then you can see the TimeXtender Tuesdays, and there's a link to that registration page. Also, just a couple of other quick notes. If you're a partner, watch your inbox. They're going to be getting some invitations, one for our Q4 partner call that's coming up on April 21st, and the other is for a brand new partner exclusive event that we're hosting on April 29th called Inspiron. Inspiron is a TimeXtender culture and DNA event with an award-winning author as a presenter that will be leading a discussion on how to build a team culture of high performance, trust, and belonging. So if you're a TimeXtender partner, this is something that you have access to. So watch your inbox, and we'll be sending you information about that. So with that, we've gone all the way around the globe and back in 30 minutes or less at 9:29. So thank you very much for participating with us on TimeXtender Tuesdays, episode 3. And we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks.